It's very rare for this series to give a direct follow-up to a Mothership title the attention and effort to be a Mothership title in of itself, but hey, it happened with Tales of Destiny, and it happened with Tales of Xillia. Xillia. I know we supposedly settled on a pronunciation, but we're sticking with that one from here on out, dang it, and it will be great. Tales of Xillia 2 is the 14th Mothership title in this JRPG franchise, and one that from name alone garnered a lot of intrigue and hype. As previously stated, while certain Tales Mothership titles have gotten sequels, the last one that was a Mothership title in of itself was all the way back with the true Destiny 2, a game you can't even play if you live outside of Japan. Although apparently Korea got it, so good for you all, I guess. No, I'm not bitter. Xillia, while at the end of the day a great game that I love dearly, couldn't help but be bogged down mostly due to the game suffering from being rushed in many aspects, especially near the end and in regards to the actual ending. Olympios is a whole new world, so why the heck is it the shortest part of the adventure? Why does it feel like there's so much missing right at the last second? I know I said it last time, but it bears repeating. My first thought when watching the credits roll was, thank God there's a sequel, leaving a bit of a sour taste in my mouth, and I much prefer sweet than sour. It seems Bamco felt the same way, because due to them having to rush Xillia and cut out a lot of ideas, they decided to bring all of that to light with tons of new concepts to make the full-blown 40-hour extravaganza we have today. And what we've got is one of the most divisive entries in the series. This game's weird, so weird, taking many risks and experimenting with a lot of crazy ideas, but I'm getting ahead of myself. We've got a long video ahead of us, and being that this is a sequel with many shared aspects of the first game, I'm gonna at least attempt not to take as long as last time. Either way, I've got a lot to say on Xillia 2, so why don't we stop the formalities already, take a sip of ice-cold, refreshing water, and get right into our revolutionary review for Tales of Xillia 2. That was an accident. Tales of Xillia 2 had started being worked on in 2011 as soon as Xillia was finished and released. Hideo Baba, the series producer at the time, couldn't help but think about how the worlds of Rise Maxia and Olympios were doing after the original game's ending, and in combination with a lot of its lore and such being told to the player through text, the team wanted to explore the world further in a direct sequel. Let the church say amen. Before the game was released, there was a whole website dedicated to being a countdown for the game's reveal. Baba had described it as a more modernized take on the series, and that the game would surround this one question: are you prepared to destroy the world for the girl? Absolutely. When it was finally revealed, we were shown the new characters, Ludger, Julius, and Elle specifically, fresh designs for returning characters, tons of dope scenes from the game, and the big twist: player choice. Yes please? The game was described as the choices that spin the future RPG, looking to be something really unique and special in the series for darn sure. It's just too bad that at the time this trailer was revealed in Japan, we overseas hadn't even gotten the first game yet. In fact, this game was released in Japan before everyone got the first game. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Being a Tales fan freaking sucks. If a Rise doesn't have a worldwide release, what's even the point, man? It doesn't help that this game looked promising as heck. Modern Tales, player choices that affect the flow of the story, Alvin's got a beard, Kitty? I cannot wait to get my hands on this one, holy crap. The game was released in Japan on November 1st, 2012, followed by North America on August 19th, 2014, and finally Europe on the 22nd of the same month, same year. This game did fairly well with review scores, although slightly less so than the first. If there's one thing reviewers could agree on, it was that the battle system was even better than the first game, but for everything else, story, art direction, graphics, all that good jazz, people can't seem to agree on whether it's good or bad, let alone better or worse than the original. Then when asking you guys, I was ready for some conflicting opinions, and sure enough, that's exactly what I got. I know, I'm a genius, but let's proceed. I decided on top of asking you all for general thoughts to contribute to this video discussion, as this is as much of a conversation as it is a review, I would make a little poll to give a simpler way to contribute. I'm still a relatively small channel at the time of this video, so while I didn't get as many voters as some of the big YouTuber dudes would, we have still got some interesting results. results. I mean, for starters, only 50% of the voters said that this game was good and better than the original. 50%! Another 38% of you said that the game's good, but doesn't top the OG. 10% said the game was straight up bad and worse than the first time around, and a whole 2% milk said that the game was bad, but still better than the first game. I'm guessing that's like one person, so thank you for being honest, but I'm coming to kick that butt the second I get. The common theme with you guys' responses was that for every good thing Xillia 2 did, it does something equally as bad. In fact, at Nexusijo, probably pronounced that wrong, sorry dude, went so far as to call it a double-edged sword, and that's a good way of putting a lot of you all's thoughts. Of course, some of you completely felt one way or the other, but the mass majority of you all seem pretty mixed on the game as a whole. Now it's time for me to throw my hat in the ring of discussion and tell you all how I feel about the game. A lot of you may be thinking that you already know how I feel about Xillia 2 given my top 10 Tales games video and all I said about it there on top of its ranking, but that video is already outdated in terms of my opinions, and I'm gonna remake it in some way, shape, or form after the retrospective concludes. I mean, in that video I said that I love Tales of Grace's F, and now, well, that's a discussion for a future part in the retrospective, but I replayed Xillia 2 for the sake of the retrospective, let alone the video, and I have a solid answer on how I feel about this very strange game. And why is this game so weird? What could this game possibly introduce and attempt to make it stick out so much in the franchise? How do my choices affect the way the game progresses, if at all? How much does combat improve on the already solid foundation? And is this game ultimately better than the first Xillia, let alone a good game at all? Lord help me, we've got a lot to unpackage, so let's get this bad boy started for real as we talk about the presentation. This is Tales of Xillia. This is Tales of Xillia 2, and boy oh boy, they look exactly the same. Both games use the same exact engine in both the overworld and battlefield, so visuals haven't been changed in any way, shape, or form, and that's not entirely a bad thing. Many sequels in gaming use the same engine as the first time around, like Gunvolt 2, Danganronpa 2, Fire Emblem Blazing Sword. I could go on, but you get the point. Not every sequel has to give the graphics a major overhaul of an improvement, especially if the graphics were already pretty good to begin with. I mean, they'd be nice, sure, but they aren't a necessity. As such, the same positives and negatives I expressed for the first game's visuals can be applied here, including the anime cutscenes, which are still jaw-dropping thanks to the Babe Ufotable. I only wish there were more of these, because this game had so few anime cutscenes over the course of the story when compared to the original and every other Tales game. The game throws you a bunch at the beginning, which is great, but it feels like you could go forever without another one, and the few you do get are so short. There are plenty, all things considered, but they weren't spaced out well enough. Is that just me? Either way, it's pretty much a nitpick, and I shouldn't feel entitled to a bunch. It's just that they're so freaking good, and I want as many as I can get. At the end of the day, Xillia 2 isn't the best looking PS3 game around, but I do love the anime cutscenes, as well as its art direction enough to ignore it. The returning cast's new character designs are really great, and in all honesty, I may just prefer them to the original ones. While the first game was more about an adventure spanning the whole worlds, this one has a lot of emphasis on the main cast living their lives after their journey and trying to focus on their new jobs and getting settled into their passions while seeing their dreams and newfound missions to their completion. As such, they're dressed like normal people with that little bit of flair to make them recognizable, and due to all that, I can't help but find their outfits all the more memorable and better. Jude's rocking your I'm an anime protagonist haircut, Alvin looks even more badass with that beautiful facial hair, Leia's hat, I freaking love Leia's hat. It's all so good, and that doesn't even begin to scratch the surface with the way all the characters look now. As for the newbies, they fit right in as well. They also follow the game's new art direction, and as such, I feel the designs are just as good as the rest of the cast. I especially love Ludger, who's got a lot going on but manages to look so darn clean. Is it the hair? Yeah, it's probably the hair. Then with the game's whole modern aspects coming to the forefront, there are some unique looking environments and aspects to look at. What they mean by this is that there'll just be more time spent in Olympios, as for those who played the first game know, that world was more technologically driven than the lush environments of Rise Maxia. To be honest, they don't go as far with the concept as I would have liked, but I did love all the new locations we got here, further emphasizing the barren lands of the world alongside the booming cities and towns. It made me want more because of how different it was, not just from Rise Maxia, but all the other worlds the series has provided. It's cool, and a shame I still felt underwhelmed in terms of exploring this concept aesthetically speaking, but given what we have is so good, I guess I can't complain too much. For now. Combine all this with a bunch of dope looking side characters and antagonists, you've got yourself one of the better looking Tales games in terms of the art style. I love it, front to back. Voice work is about on par with the original game, as the original cast all return to reprise their roles, with special shoutouts to Mine Noji, voice of Mila, for the excellent range.
Al, that's enough! What? I wasn't that loud.
I take it that you're Beasley Bakor. Looking at you, You do appear to be a formidable man.
Minor characters also have the same voice actors, which was a very nice touch, and the new characters bring the heat much to my listening pleasure. We've got an interesting case though. You see, Ludger isn't just any protagonist, but our first semi-silent one. I say semi-silent because your first time playing through the game, he'll make grunts and say a line every other blue moon, but his main form of communication is through the game's choice system. Basically, you'll be the one to decide what Ludger says, and he doesn't speak the line afterwards, so while he isn't mute per se, you won't be hearing his voice over the course of your playthrough. A cool thing about this is that it's for a story reason, much like my boy Sigma from Virtue's Last Reward. However, much like Sigma, it's so distracting that there's one character who does in fact talk, you just don't hear their voice, even more so because it's the freaking protagonist. I didn't mind this too much my first time through as I eventually grew used to it, but I don't know man, it would have been nice if Ludger spoke the lines he picked out for him. Funnily enough, on New Game Plus, that's exactly what they allowed you to do, for 0 grade no less. For those keen listeners, they'd be able to figure out why they wouldn't want you to hear Ludger's voice in the first place, but they could have figured something out to make this decision far less distracting. Other than that, I'd say we're good. However you felt about the voice cast last time, odds are you'll feel the same here, and for me anyway, that's a great thing. Now that soundtrack, oh boy! All the songs from the first Xillia make a return, so we've got a strong start already. But even just considering all the new songs, I love this thing. Near the end of Xillia, we heard a few tracks from Olympios, and the songs here are more jazzy than the orchestral-inspired ones from Rise Maxia to further differentiate the two worlds. It was a nice little touch. Now that the majority of the story takes place in Olympios, we get more of that sweet jazz, and I love that stuff. So many songs right from the get-go are incredibly catchy. I really like the battle themes, and the boss themes especially are ridiculous. There are a couple of tracks that only play for one battle, and they're so good with the incredible build-up, heightening the fight in moments. I can't talk about them or show them for spoiler reasons, but those who played the game know exactly what I'm talking about. This game's soundtrack is excellent. When specifically referring to the soundtrack's original tracks only, it's just as small as the first game's, and it might not be as good as the original, but who cares? The game itself provides songs from both games, so we might as well consider them one soundtrack, no? Xillia 2 has some bomb music on its own, and the OG soundtrack in addition just makes it even better. With the two combined, it probably lands in my top 5 OSTs in the series, but that's just off the top of my head. I've never seriously sat down to think about that, so yeah. Presentation's more or less the same as the first, both in terms of what it actually is and what I think of it. That being said, when it does set itself apart from the original, like with its character designs, the world of Olympios, and new voice actors, and additions to the soundtrack, they all succeed. Overall, the game looks solid, albeit underwhelming when compared to other PS3 games, let alone Tales games before it, but the sound department's a solid amazing out of 10, making this presentation pretty good in my eyes. No harm done here. Now, the story is where things get very interesting. In a good way? A bad way? Let's refresh our memory on what exactly this story is before we talk about that. You play as Ludger, an Olympian who's just trying to make it in the world by getting a job to help his brother Julius pay their bills, and feed Rolo so he can take over the world, which in of itself trumps anything else this story is trying to accomplish. But I guess for formality's sake, we might as well continue. Ludger attempts to complete a test that'll make him an agent for the Spurious Corporation, just like his brother, but unfortunately, no matter what you do, he ends up failing, which is a bummer. So, just to make sure we're crystal clear, our first scenario where we the player are given player choice has one outcome no matter what you do. Let that be a sign of things to come. Meanwhile, a little girl named Elle and her dad are being attacked by villainous peeps, and when they have a breather, her father tells her to go to the land of Canaan, the place where any wish can be granted, as he gives her his pocket watch. This all sadly happens right before her father dies, as she barely makes it out by the skin of her teeth. Back to the Super Xillia Bros, Ludger ends up getting a job as a train station chef and is about to head to work. The station is where a ceremony is being held as the CEO of Spurious is headed to a factory for some political business, and coincidentally enough, best boy Judah's headed there. Same with Elle, almost like something's gonna happen there. Yup, there it is. Say hello to the Tales protagonist, cursed Ludger. Hopping onto the train, now being attacked by Exodus as it seems, he runs into Elle, Jude, and finally the CEO of Spurious named Beasley, who tells him that if he can stop the train and figure out what the heck is going on, he'll immediately be allowed to be a Spurious agent. Seems simple enough, as the boys, Ludger and Jude, are way more than capable of handling things. One JRPG protagonist, you might be able to handle them. Two JRPG protagonists, might as well call it quits while you can. Moving right along, it seems like Julius is at the front of the train and is responsible for it being hijacked in the first place. Before anyone can ask any questions, a weird phenomenon, that's a word I haven't used yet, happens, and it's seeming like Ludger, Jude, and Elle are having déjà vu. The same interaction with Beasley and his assistant occurs, only with these two other people, Verlaine and Nova, the latter of which Ludger recognizes. To make matters even weirder, they catch back up with Julius at the front, only this time he's way more hostile and immediately tries to kill both of them. Heck, if you refuse to kill him after his boss fight, he'll kill kill Verlaine and Nova without any hesitation, much to everyone's horror. Ludger, in a fit of frustration, seems to have killed Julius with this badass lance that just sorta appeared out of nowhere, and the world seems to break? There's a lot of weird stuff happening, and eventually you're told that was your first visit to an alternate dimension, which is why when you come to, Julius and Nova are still alive and unaware they even died in the first place. There are a bunch of these different dimensions, and because of that, the Prime Dimension is crumbling apart. This is why the Spurious Corporation was founded, to destroy all of these alternate dimensions and keep the Prime One alive and well. Because so many what they refer to as fractured dimensions have been appearing, the balance of the primary dimension you reside in is thrown off, and they're trying to get rid of as many fractured dimensions as possible to keep the Prime Dimension stable. If you destroy a Fractured Dimension's catalyst, the main thing that differentiates it from the Prime Dimension, the Fractured Dimension will be destroyed, explaining why the world sort of crumbled after you killed Julius on the train. The company's ultimate goal is to reach the land of Canaan, where just like Elle's dad told her, any wish can be granted. Beasley's wish would be to destroy all Fractured Dimensions, and being that the company put our poor boy Ludger 20 million gold in debt after the first train incident, Ludger has no choice but to help him. Not to mention Elle's trying to go there anyway, and the two decide to partner up to help each other achieve their goals. Reach the land of Canaan, find Julius, save the Prime Dimension, and pay out 20 million gold in the process. Don't get mad, Ludger. Get money. And whew, I cut that down a lot because holy crap, there's a lot going on in just the first few hours. The game, if anything, comes out swinging and doesn't relent for a good while, being that there's a lot happening in the plot. Where do I even begin? Alright, so, being that this game has so much going on, what with the main plot, the 8 other party members all having their own conflicts and arcs, and that big old 20 million gold debt, the game is split up into 3 main portions: the main chapters, character quests, and free time in between it all. The main quest is where the plot I just summarized progresses and the real meat of this game lies. The focus is on Ludger, Elle, Julius, and Spurious all dealing with the problems the fractured dimensions provide, along with the conflicts between one another. And honestly, the main story's alright. There are, without a doubt, some of the entire series' best moments with fantastic set pieces, hell yeah scenes, and parts where even the strongest of us can't help but cry like a little baby. Not to mention, I love everything about Fractured Dimensions. They made for, again, some of the series' best moments, and they work incredibly well with the game's themes of choice and sacrifice, being that you're destroying entire dimensions for the sake of saving yours. I also really like the world building and how Olympios and Rize Maxia had to learn to coexist along with the problems that provided. Made for a lot of mature subtext, and the fact that we're playing through the perspective of an Olympian rather than someone from Rize Maxia gave us another angle on said conflict. Heck, the bulk of the main story takes place in Olympios, hence why the game's said to have a more modern setting, being that's exactly what Olympios is. Unfortunately, while that's somewhat true, I still don't feel we were shown enough of Olympios. You're gonna be so shocked when you reach the final area of Olympios, because it's so sudden. When I got there, I was waiting for hours expecting another Olympian city, but it never happened, and all I could think was, wait, this is it? The size of Olympios still pales in comparison to how fleshed out Rize Maxia is, which is a shame, not only because the game was advertised and supposed to focus on this more, but what we did get was great. I loved the sketchy back alleys of Duval and the food culture that Draylin was all about, and was excited to see what else the game would throw at me, but it simply wasn't enough. Sadly, that's not my only issue with the game's story. Due to the chapter by chapter setup and how debt is handled, more on that later, a lot of the story felt almost episodic in how it's structured. Sure, the core plot is still moving forward, but not with the same flow as a normally structured Tales game. This story unfortunately suffers from pacing issues, and while this problem disappears during the game's final chapters, at that point the damage had been done. Again, more on this later, as a gameplay feature is what makes this problem a thing in the first place. Then there's the whole player input deal. Oh boy. This was one of the biggest reasons I was excited for this game, but it's pretty rough. Here's the deal. There are moments in the story where you choose either what Ludger says or does, which leads to a variety of different results, such as what order you can play chapters, which characters will like you better, and more importantly, which ending you'll receive. Playing chapters in different orders is a neat little touch and makes repeat playthroughs more interesting. I could get Leia and Rowan added to my party first, or Alvin and Elise. The choice is entirely mine, and I like that. Nothing crazy, but it's the little things like these that make player choice so cool and fun. It's just a shame that when it comes to the bigger things that make player choice so cool and fun, the game starts slacking. This is a game that advertises itself as one where every choice matters, but that's straight up untrue. The most your decisions mean a thing are raising party member affinity, as some things you say or do will make others like him more. There are 10 affinity levels per party member, and as far as I'm aware, there's no way for these to lower. Here's my beef. Because my choices don't matter in the grand scheme of things, dialogue choices can boil down to right or wrong answers, since you can be given a question that'll either raise affinity or do nothing. So why on earth wouldn't I use a guide to make sure I get the absolute most affinity possible possible for my party members. I mean, that's what I eventually started doing all the way back in my first run through the game, and I shouldn't have to say I used a guide for pretty much all of what are supposed to be my choices. If you don't care that much about the rewards you'll receive for getting all platonic with Yusei, then it's whatever, I guess. But if you do, much like myself, and especially if you're trying to dabble in the post-game, you're really gonna be kicking yourself when you have to grind for those higher affinity levels. Simply linking Ludger up with another party member raises affinity between the two, but at such an incredibly slow rate that you'll have to grind and grind and grind to reach the higher levels, further dampening the choice system, being that the game itself is encouraging me not to say what I want, but what my party members want. Not to mention, the game is trying to give Ludger an arc, but that clashes with him being or attempting to be a self-insert for the player. On one hand, you're trying to make Ludger go the way you want his character to go, but many story scenes have him acting on his own. On the other hand, you can just give him commands that make him act entirely out of character for the sake of choice, while at the same time facing zero consequences other than not getting higher affinity levels. You can be the biggest dirtbag whenever possible and still get the best ending if you make the right choice at the last second, where the game basically asks you, "Alright dude, which ending do you want?" It's dumb, and tosses aside any weight my choices have if I don't care about the bonus goodies from my party members. That's not how you do branching storylines and player choice in a video game. I'm not asking for every decision to make a major difference over the course of the story. Heck, Persona and Fire Emblem Three Houses don't do this. I'm just saying do more than the bare minimum. Give me more important and meaningful choices over the course of the story. A game that does player choice well while not having to write entirely new scenarios for every single choice while still giving decisions weight is Catherine. The game uses a scale that tips for every decision you make, and based on which thresholds you pass, you'll get a specific ending. Xillia 2 would have benefited from something like this, where you could have Ludger act in a way that would make sense during specific story scenes, and especially those endings, because he was built up to morally go in that direction based on my decisions. But Zafre, I don't want to get locked out of the true ending. Then don't be a jerk. It's that simple. Why should the player be allowed to drag their party members through the dirt and still get the happy ending? What's the point of giving me choice if my choices have no substantial consequences? These are things you gotta think about when implementing story decisions, and this game doesn't do that, making the feature half-baked. I like the idea, I really do, but execution could have been much better, and that's especially disappointing when this was advertised as such a big part of the game's identity. Ironically, it barely makes any difference whatsoever, and I doubt anyone would have asked for something like this if it wasn't included. That's my main issue with the game's player influence. It doesn't make enough of a difference that the game would feel like something else without it. What would we be missing out on without player choice? A handful of different endings that aren't even canon? Some goodies from party member affinity that could just as easily have been given as a reward for a side quest? It's not enough, making me ponder what the point of it even was. It was an experiment for sure, but they don't go far enough with the idea. I wouldn't mind seeing another attempt at this in the future, with further consequences and the feature having more of an impact on the game as a whole, but for what we have now, this ain't it. So yeah, this game's got multiple endings. There are 5 total, a bad, 1 normal, true, and 2 joke endings you can get in the post game. The bad ending is really hard to get because of the boss standing between you and it, and like I said previously, it's so out of character for Ludger. But it was interesting enough and made me feel bad when I got it, even if it was for the sake of footage. The joke endings were amazing, the normal ending bittersweet, but I absolutely adore the true ending. I remember thinking it was good my first time playing through the game, but this recent playthrough, the ending hit me a lot harder. This is a bit of a hot take, but this game's true ending might just be my favorite ending in the series. I just felt all warm and fuzzy, and it goes without saying that this game's canon end is miles better than the original's incredibly underwhelming finish. Again, it's just too bad that more decisions didn't impact which end I would get at my journey's conclusion. Man, I've been complaining about the story a lot, haven't I? Well, like I said, the story as a whole is just okay. There are so many great moments, cute character interactions, albeit not as many as I would have liked in the main story, and Fractured Dimensions kick butt. It's just that the bad is about as apparent in this narrative's case, especially when you take into account all it's trying to do. I find it somewhat underwhelming that for a character-driven story, we have all these characters and don't do much with them to the point where they're there to fill up party slots most of the time. The character interactions we get are great, but why don't we get more of these? Skits are 10 out of 10 as normal, but I mean in the main story. We have next to no scenes of party members just hanging out and talking like normal people that are a part of the main narrative. Then for the characters who are given focus and are responsible for moving things forward, they do an alright job, but aren't enough. Talking about the main story and the main story alone, I like Ludger, Julius, and L, but I don't love Ludger, Julius, and L. Like I touched on earlier, the game gives Ludger an arc despite being a silent protagonist. He's just a normal guy who wants a chill, comfortable life, and sucks when it comes to decision making and giving things up, directly correlating with the game's theme. But because he doesn't talk, unless you're on New Game Plus, a lot of moments where great voice voice delivery could have heightened things never come to fruition. And I get it, actions speak louder than words, to which the game succeeds. I did say I like him after all. But him interacting with his party members would have definitely helped, and maybe even ditching the self-insert concept to dive deeper into the character the game so desperately wants to give him. We see glimpses of what could have been a much more involved and as a result likable character in the victory quotes, but there's not enough of this in the main story to improve his character to a higher status. He's cool, but he's no Jude or Mila. Elle's the cute little girl who actively motivates Ludger to keep going, and they begin to grow a father-daughter relationship that's hella cute. She's fun, quippy, and never got annoying to me, so I liked her too. I just wish she got more time and focus over the main story. A lot of her dialogue amounts to speaking for Ludger, but I wanted her to speak for herself. How's she dealing with seeing her father die right before her eyes? How does she feel about these other characters tagging along? More time with her would have been much appreciated. And then there's Julius. Yeah, he was pretty cool. Had good development over the course of the game, but much like Elle, I would have ended up loving him if we had more time together. Not even the antagonists were too great or near the level of the last game's selection, which was a bummer. They were considerably less than last time, but ironically enough, they had less to them than the others. How does that even happen? So as a whole, the story's a solid 8 out of 10, which is a shame, especially compared to the original's great story. It's a lot more consistent than the original, but still not as good overall, with the characters not helping much in that regard. High-key a disappointment. At least that's what I would say if we didn't have the character quests. Hold on to your concerns over my critiques, because character quests take up about half the story and completely change the game, all the while turning an okay narrative into a fantastic one. These are my favorite parts of the story without question. For one, the main focus of these are on the OG cast, and as such they're given the proper attention and care I yearned for. In fact, this game is the main reason why the Xillia cast is my second favorite. After the first game, they were top 5, but Xillia 2 is what bumped them up to top 2. Right now, of course, I'm still playing through a bunch of the titles, but man, this will be a hard group to top. They're still their developed selves from the original arcs each character underwent in Xillia. They just continue to grow even further and build on the endings they were given. We can see Jude grow even more thanks to his Spirate research trials and tribulations. Leia is given much better treatment becoming a journalist and learning independence. The list goes on and on. There are a handful of character quests that are much weaker compared to the others, however. Specifically, I found Elise and Mila to have been given the shorthand. Both just switched their focus on a dime, and that baffled me to no end. They were doing so good. Why are we suddenly changing what they're about, leaving us with 2 half-baked mini arcs rather than one that's really good? I digress. These 2 don't hamper the experience too much because that's only 25% of the 8 people cast, and the others were so tight. No matter if the focus was on the character in question, their role in the lore or world building, and even a natural mixture of the 2, these quests give the story and almost all it's trying to do much more context and depth. Because of these, I'm so glad the OG cast is back as they are used to the fullest. Ludger and Elle are given much more time and meaningful interactions with the cast, and I went from liking to loving them, and I view the entire story as a fantastic one as a direct result. Now, it can be argued that the character quests shouldn't matter when criticizing the story. After all, they're 100% optional. My argument against that would be this is excusable and an accepted way to deepen the game's story because Tales of Xillia 2 is a game that encourages you to do the bulk of its side content more than any other Tales game. Heck, you're required to do at least some of it, but we'll get to that. Because of the push in the direction of the side content, I see this game in the same light of something like Majora's Mask, where the side content is what makes up most of the experience and how you'll get the most out of the game. Sure, you don't have to do the character quests, but why the heck wouldn't you? They're clearly a major part of the game's identity, you just have to go out of your way to do them. Not a big deal at all, and you should never have to use a guide to find them thanks to how the game organizes these and all the other side quests. With all this in mind, and shorter side quests only adding to the layers of the story, what with the Kresnik line, the affairs between Rize, Maxia, and Olympios trying to coexist, and so much more, Xillia 2 has one hell of a memorable, quality-filled story that I loved the whole way through. If it weren't for the side content, I wouldn't be too big on it, but because of how the game sets itself up while emphasizing said side content, they both coexist and make the other look better, so it ends up working out. Combat is very similar to Xillia, so we shouldn't spend too much time on this segment. Probably. Hopefully. All the mechanics that were in the first game are here too. Auto items, linking, linked arts, said linked arts activating overlimit, mystic arts, linked perks, and different characters with their own gimmicks. Though sadly switching party members in the middle of battle is nowhere to be seen, which is kinda whack, but I never used this feature too much. I don't know, I like to commit to the party I have, and playing a ton of the games before the Xillia duology, I never got used to the fact that you could switch mid-battle in every game onward. It's a convenience that's no longer there, which is a fault, but not that big of a deal depending on who you are, and I personally don't care so I think this is a forgivable omission though, due to the fact that your party extends from 6 playable characters to 9, the max this series has had available in your party at once. That means we have 3 new party members, Ludger, my patron Gaius, and Muse. Playing as the 2 major antagonists from the first game is a blast, and fun fact, playing as them was one of the biggest things they wanted to put in the first Xillia game. It's nice to have the concept finally come to light, and both play so clean, fitting right in with the rest of the Xillia cast. Muse's aerial movement along with the high tier spells and Gaia's sheer power and counterattacks add a lot to the table. And did I mention you're playing as the 2 major antagonists from the first game? That's badass! Ludger, however, doesn't fit right in with the rest of the Xillia cast. He's on a whole other level. Putting this as blunt as possible, Ludger is the most broken and ridiculous protagonist in the series. No, he's the most broken and ridiculous playable character in the series. No contest and no questions asked. He's just as fast as Jude in terms of movement speed, hits the fastest in the game, has a ton of arts and combo potential, dishes out crazy damage, and it's all thanks to the dual knives. Oh yeah, and did I mention that's just a third of his combo kit? Ludger's gameplay gimmick is switching between 3 sets of weapons, the dual knives, sledgehammer, and dual pistols, each sporting their own incredibly long list of arts and combo potential. He has so many ways to approach combat, and due to your ability to switch weapons on the fly, you can have some crazy combos involving switching between his weapon kit and using each weapon's pros to your advantage. And to top it all off, he eventually is able to transform into the Chromatus, having unique combos, takes no damage, and can wreck enemies and bosses straight up. It has a time limit, and instead of damage, you lose chunks of your time if you're hit to compensate and balance it out, making it not too overpowered, but it still feels so good when you unleash that power. The Chromatus transformation upgrades as you progress over the game, allowing for more time and damage, and it's a freaking blast. Ludger is a freaking blast. He has absolutely no right to play this clean, but alas, he does, and we all love it. Now, you might be worried that this would make the game even easier, as one of my biggest problems with the OG was that the game was too much of a breeze. Well, fear not, because Xillia 2 cranks the difficulty way up, and I love that. Tales of Xillia 2 is hard, really hard. Comparing my first Xillia 2 playthrough on moderate to my first Xillia 1 playthrough on moderate, the difference was night and day, and I had to try a lot more. This second time playing both games back to back on hard with the same buffs on New Game Plus, mind you, I still noticed that difference. Enemies hit a lot harder and a lot faster, meaning that you can't just go through the motions even on normal encounters. Then there are the bosses, which are way more aggressive as they should be, because like the first game, you have a lot of tools at your disposal to be able to deal with these things. Their tag outs and arcane arts that can combo into mystic arts are always telegraphed, and your main character is an overpowered monster. While there are 1 or 2 annoying mandatory fights, pretty much every boss was an absolute blast and heightened my experience with the game. The bosses are pretty tough right from the start, but where the game really begins to ramp things up is in that first Chronos fight, and that's where I felt the game was starting to become something really special. This fight is tough, infamously one of the harder fights in the game, and kind of a difficulty spike. Everyone I know gets caught off guard the first time he uses Tetra Spell, where 4 elemental spell attacks all gang up on you and almost guarantee an instant KO. You've gotta be fast with your magic guarding, and being that he can cast haste and almost immediately pull the spell off, you need to stay on your toes to win. It's such a challenge, but when you finally get him to low health and he becomes weak to all weapons, finally wailing on him to come out on top, it feels so good. And I say kind of a difficulty spike because it feels like the game keeps up the higher difficulty for the remaining bosses, minus a few that are pretty easy. And don't get me wrong, I'm okay with that because no matter how tough things got, I never ever felt the need to grind. This is why I like it when Tales games pump out the challenge. I'm a firm believer that the Tales series emphasizes player skill more than levels, numbers, and stats. And I've never had to grind in any Tales game. If there's a tough opponent ahead of you, change your strategy. Lucky you, Xillia 2 has lots of options for you to do just that, so because of this, the harder fights feel doable. Even when the game limits your party to specific characters, which it does a lot, because every character has so much to them, you still feel you can change up how your teammates act and what you do to go about the fight in a different way. Xillia 2 being so tough is a huge reason why the combat is so good. I'm encouraged to use all these options to come out on top, giving me a deeper appreciation for all of the mechanics and options. I love that! You're able to stand your own against harder opponents, and especially because this is a sequel, the developers had the option to make things a little tougher on your second round trip through the worlds of Rize Maxia and Olympios. After all, who the heck's gonna start with Xillia 2? It has a 2 in its name, so it's safe to assume that people will at least start with the first one, no? Get used to the combat in that game, then truly be put to the test in the sequel. It's a formula for success, and makes playing the 2 games back to back as one experience all the more satisfying. Other than what we just talked about, there are smaller changes that help clean the combat up that much further. Originally, only select arts could link together for special linked arts. After all, it's completely reasonable that they didn't come up with a combination attack for every pair of arts in the game. That's just extra. Especially now that there are 9 characters and returning party members have gotten new arts, no thank you. However, I have 2 arts don't form a special linked art. They default to either Link Charge, Link Pillar, or Link Cannon, meaning that every single art can link up for longer, more seamless linked art combos. Whenever you're comboing an enemy and their HP is out, you turn your normal hits into grave hits, showing how much overkill you're doing to the poor opposing force. Elemental weaknesses are way more prevalent for the first time in the franchise, I'd say. If you strike an enemy with their weakness, attacks that follow it for a period of time will deal extra damage, and if you attack with another element of any kind during that period, the timer will reset and you can do even further damage for longer, heightening the game's combo system and preventing bosses from teching out if you can keep dishing out the damage. Characters have been tweaked for the better too. Many characters have had their speed, at least starting speed, lowered significantly compared to the first game, which would seem like an issue, but to me that helps the game's balancing out a lot more. Jude was way too fast at the beginning of Xillia, so for this game they slow him down at the start. Sure, it's a nerf, but it doesn't make him freaking unplayable. His snap pivoting is still satisfying to work with, and he ends up the same overpowered speed demon as before, you just have to actually work for it this time. Crazy, I know, but I'm the kind of guy who'd rather work for his overpowered party members rather than the game just handing them to me. Oh, and you can't get party wiped from petrification anymore. Hallelujah! With all these additions and changes in mind, combined with the higher difficulty and more being demanded from the player, I find this combat system to be even better than Xillia's, and it lands a spot in my top 3 for combat in the franchise. Of course, that's subject to change, being that there are a bunch of games I've yet to play, but I love it so much. It's not only fast and fun, but has a lot of depth, and I have to try in order to come out on top, especially with those bosses who are easily the highlights of the game. Even more so when you're in the late to end game. Holy crap, you get some great fights that cost me a couple of game overs, and I loved every minute. That being said, there's no such thing as a perfect battle system in this series, or any game for that matter, so let's go over my issues. Specifically, that this game fixed the problems I had with the first game and didn't introduce new ones. Other than the lack of party member switching, I wouldn't say that the game brought any new issues to the table, but it didn't exactly fix everything I didn't like from the first game. You can still spam arts over and over again, being that every single art, regardless of strength, still only costs 1 AC to use. Regardless of TP costs, spamming is still very easy to do, and I'm not fond of this for this game as well. I also still don't like how linked arts activate overlimit, as well as there only being 1 bar, as the AI can steal your overlimit even if you're trying to save it, and they decided to opt out of something as simple as pushing a button to go into overlimit. It felt like it happened more often here too, so that was not very fun. Wasn't a fan of it in Xillia, and I'm not a fan of it here in Xillia 2. And then there's the slowdown, and is it just me, or was it even worse in this game? The first was already loading and calculating a lot of stuff in the background, but this game even more so, and holy crap does it show. It's straight up ugly how much the game chugs through a lot of battles that almost always have a lot going on visually, and only makes controlling my character more of a hassle than it should be. But other than those, that's about it for my faults with the game's combat system. Clearly a lot more positives than negatives, especially considering how much I cut out so I don't reiterate what we already know. Xillia 2 plays so well, and I'm glad to know that improvements were made enough not only to top the original, but fly high on its own. Now to see if everything else regarding gameplay can be held to the same caliber, and if improvements were made in other areas as well. Gonna go in the same order as last time, well almost. We're gonna save side quests for later, but let's talk about those towns, dungeons, and overworld. Most of it is the same. Yeah, these areas are the most guilty when it comes to reusing content from the original other than visuals and music, as you'll find yourself traversing to areas you've already seen in the first game. Unfortunately, there aren't too many new towns like I said in the story segment, as the side of Olympio still isn't explored too in depth like I would have preferred, so the same things I said about the towns in the original game's review can be applied here. Same for the new locations. They're still really good all in all, despite the game having trouble loading NPCs. One time in particular, I saw an NPC doing a freaking T-pose, and that was a blessed day indeed. Also, Mutton's guy is still here. 10 out of 10. What isn't a 10 out of 10 though is the fact that you can't bring your whole party out of towns. Whoever's in your 4 party member slots when you leave a town or city are locked in until you reach another town or city. And that's a problem quite a few of you don't appreciate. Honestly though, I couldn't care less. I didn't notice this on my first playthrough because I don't switch my party around that often. The way I play, I tend to switch around my party when I get to the next town and stick with who I have. And if you really want to switch, you can just quick travel to the nearest town and take another minute or 2 to get back to where you left off. I think people over-exaggerate this issue. I never found it to be too crazy of a problem, but judge that little quirk as you will. As for me, I don't care. So, dungeons are about the same as well, and even though there are a few new dungeons that I liked a lot more than the dungeons we had from the original, it's still on the same level as the first game. Little to no puzzle solving, and while not boring like the rest, the new dungeons in this game are still meh. And of course, the overworld still sucks. I was really hoping these would get an overhaul, but nah. The trash. Oh well, you kind of get used to them 2 games in, but they haven't improved in the slightest. Let's see, is there anything else I'm missing? Anything at all? Oh, the item shop. This thing has changed quite a bit as they ditched the whole donation system and went back to how it used to be. You buy items and over the course of the game shops will expand. They bring back the synthesis system as the main thing to get all the better items, and is it just me or is this game way more strict with getting materials to make the higher tier gels and weapons than like any other Tales game? I like that as it adds to the challenge, but it was something I noticed. Okay, let's see, anything else? Oh yeah, Kitty Dispatch! You too can help with Rillo's conquest of Rize Maxia and Olympios as you send him off to get exclusive items and materials from different areas in Rize Maxia and Olympios, of course. You can find cats in the overworld to send out to different parts of the world, and you'll just get a bunch of cool stuff out of it. Micromanaging? Yeah, but it was a neat little addition. But anyway, I'm pretty sure I covered everything, so I guess we're done here.
Buck up, Lutz. It won't always be a slog.
Alright, okay, we can talk about the debt already. So remember how a big part of the story is that Luger's 20 million gold in debt? That wasn't just a little tidbit for the story. You, the player, are also 20 million gold in debt. After every chapter following the second one, you won't be able to progress in the story until you save up enough gold to meet a threshold and pay off part of your debt, as access to other cities will be cut off until you make certain amounts of payments. This is a major reason why side content is forced, and this is, without a doubt, the most controversial part of the game. It's easy to see why this is, too. No other Tales game has hindered your progress by using a paywall, an in-game paywall. This isn't EA, so we're good on that front. Even if there was a moment or two where you had to pay for information or something in the story, as I said, it would just be for a moment or two and nothing more. The debt paywall is a consistent thing, as nearly every chapter is followed by our girl Nova chiming in to say, "Hey Luger, let's not forget about your debt now." That was Nova. And that can be a real pace breaker, especially when the story starts to get good and the player wants to see what the heck will happen next, but they can't. Objectively speaking, this is a problem. Taking away that choice from the player to progress the story at their own pace is a problem. If the player wants to move on with the story and not mess with the side quest, they should be able to. I compared this game to Majora's Mask earlier, and while side content is a huge part of the game's identity, it's never flat out forced. You won't get a lot out of the game, but it's called side content for a reason. Why force it onto the player? Why make them go through all that even on New Game Plus? Side content itself is about the same stuff as Xillia, fetch quests and monster hunting crap, with the occasional ones that have added scenes and extra substance, along with the character quest, and it's much better organized than ever before. You've got a board of quests in every town that highlights the more important quests in red and the endless amounts of minor stuff like defeat X amount of Y or find Z, which is nice and convenient being that you have to do some quests to get money without grinding for hours on end fighting random monsters. It's pretty nice, but doesn't change the fact that if you don't want to mess with the side content, that doesn't matter. You have to do some of it in order to get through the debt paywalls, at least at a reasonable pace. It's a flaw, but that flaw in of itself is what makes the game what it is. The fact that the game forces you to dive deeper into it than any other title is what makes Tales of Xillia 2 Tales of Xillia 2, and why at the end of the day, I love it. Two things. One, getting gold because of the endless supply of missions is a breeze. Believe me when I say that you will be swimming in gold at some point and it just won't stop until the end of the game. In the first few chapters, sure, getting gold isn't too easy because of the game still opening up. I'll give you that one. But after those first few chapters, you'll have quests aplenty, character quests that you're encouraged to do more so than any other side mission that'll give you even more gold, and the boatload of Gigantos monsters that should help you pay your debt in the snap of a finger while netting some good experience. After playing through this game for the sake of the video, I found that a lot of the people exaggerate this fault. It's not that hard to get past the paywall, it just comes down to the fact that it's even an issue to begin with. And sure, but being blunt, you just gotta get over it. It's not that deep, and you'll be done in no time getting right back on track with the main story. And two, this feature, while forcing you to do side quests, is really forcing you to form a more intimate relationship with the game. It's forcing you to do the quests that expand on the characters. It's forcing you to discover more lore about the worlds. It's forcing you to love Xillia 2. You can't just go through the motions in this game. You have to be invested and interested in all the sequel's trying to do. And if you don't want to do all that, the game wants nothing to do with you. Simple as that. This is not a game for the casual Tales fan. This is not a game for the casual JRPG lover. This is a game for those who want more out of the worlds Xillia introduced and want to love it more than they already do, if at all, and I love the debt system for that very reason. If there wasn't a paywall, I may not have done as much of the side content as I ended up doing over the course of my playthroughs. When it was all said and done, I was glad that the game pushed me out of my comfort zone to appreciate all it was trying to do. The same can be said about the combat. Get good at the mechanics, or get out. Take your time to appreciate every inch of these two worlds, or play something else. That sounds like the most pretentious, unwelcoming thing ever, but I think some games can really benefit from demanding the player to do what it wants while still being a good time. It's not poor design, it's just unconventional, different, and that's why I accept it leaning so much on side content. It's why the game, despite its wild decisions, meshes well with me. It's why, despite everything, I still love the crap out of Xillia 2. Tales of Xillia 2, like I said, is a weird game, and a hard one to recommend at that. I'm not gonna sugarcoat anything. If you don't like it when a game forces you to play it the way it wants and just want a game that allows you to move from point A to B at your own pace, don't play this game. You won't like it. And it's ironic to say that when they emphasize player choice in the promotional trailers and whatnot. The game's marketing sucked, it really did, because your choices don't matter. This isn't your story. And while you have some influence over the end right at the last second, it's clear that the game's intended to be played in a certain way. If you are open to the idea of playing the game that way, delving deep into the lore and side content, taking your time to see the sites, explore the worlds, and pay that cash money, you may be surprised. The game will reward you for doing just that by giving you the most out of the story through extra scenes. You'll get tons of goodies for completing side quests and making payments. The post game is incredibly enjoyable if you put in the work over the main story, and you could even find yourself having a more satisfying experience than Xillia being the game's consistent the whole way through. I know I did. I found myself enjoying this game far more than the original, and keep in mind, I love that game. It's a high-tier Tales title, but I would go as far as to say Xillia 2 is a top-tier Tales title. I put aside my preferences, played it as intended, and came out loving it, so maybe try doing the same. Or not, the choice is yours, but I just know that this recent playthrough made me realize that due to the added tracks, tougher and deeper battle system, and a story that can be as involved as I want it to be, I can safely say that Xillia 2 is one of my very favorite Tales games for completely different reasons than my other favorites. And that's exactly what makes it so special. Well, that's the Xillia duology. Now the Tales retrospective can continue, and due to the strange order, who knows what's next? Well, I mean, you could find out what's next and decide the order of my videos on top of other perks if you join my Patreon, I'm just saying. Links to that in my social media in the description below, so whether you check that out or not, thank you for watching. Special thanks go out to the bank dudes who support me on a level I appreciate to death and back. Shoutouts to the greatest people ever by the names of Alex520, Cleric Eric, Comic Foil, Corbett, Floragrar, Forever Fizz 8, Gaius, again, Gentleman Gamer, Jacob Horner, James V, Katie, Kiara Loveday, Kimpy7, Ludom James 115, Logan, Max Hockman, Michael Douglas, Mitchie, Mongo, Renegade Master, Scott Appleman, Sean McTague, Soul, Sora Cat, Steve Appleman, Tex-Mex, and Xenoled. I love you guys. You're literally the best people ever, and I hope to see you all in the next Tales review or whatever we do next. Be sure to drink some water, and I'll see you then. Bye-bye!